The rain had stopped just hours ago, but the ground still bled mud beneath every step. A rusted mailbox leaned sideways on the edge of Willow Bend Road, pointing like a crooked finger toward the decaying barn that had become the center of everyone's nightmare. And as Officer Lena Harrow stepped out of her cruiser, her jaw clenched. "Don't waste time on ghost stories," her captain had said before she left. That place was cleared a week ago, but Lena knew better. Sometimes it wasn't ghosts you feared, it was what the living tried to bury. She glanced down at Zeus, her canine partner, who was already pulling at the leash with a strange urgency. His nose skimmed the air. His eyes narrowed toward the barn's splintered door. Something had changed. He sensed it. Lena had learned a long time ago to trust him when no one else would. The call had come in anonymously. Just a hoarse voice on a voicemail, no caller ID. "Check the McAllister barn. They're still there. 4 of them." Then a click. That was it. No names, no motive. Just enough pain in that voice to make Lena turn her car around and head back to the place everyone had forgotten. The barn sat like a broken lung in the middle of the field, collapsed in places, hollow in others. A wound stitched shut by vines and time. It wasn't just abandoned, it was avoided. Ever since the McAllister family disappeared nearly 8 years ago and the place was raided for suspected trafficking, it had become one of those places people passed but never spoke about. Zeus barked once, then again, louder, his claws scratched against the barn floor as he dragged Lena inside. Dust clouded the air, choking the weak sunlight filtering through broken planks above. The scent of old wood, rodent decay, and something metallic flooded Lena's nose. But then Zeus did something she had only seen twice in their entire career together. He growled low and deep, then dropped to the ground and began digging. Lena knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" Zeus didn't respond. His paws worked in a frenzy, churning up dirt, hay, and splinters. Suddenly, the wooden floor creaked beneath them. It wasn't just floorboards, it was a false panel, and beneath it, darkness. Her breath hitched. She grabbed the edge and pulled hard. The panel gave way with a scream of nails, revealing a hole. Stairs, crude and crooked. A basement? No, a cellar, not listed in any property survey. Zeus didn't wait. He plunged into the darkness, tail rigid, body alert. Lena followed. The descent was cold. Each step groaned beneath her weight. Her flashlight flickered, then steadied as it hit the stone floor. And there, just 10 feet away, Zeus had frozen. In the beam of her flashlight, she saw it, a mattress, stained, worn, tiny, a child's shoe, a plastic plate with crusted food, and on the wall, scratched in with what looked like fingernails, "We are here." "We are not dead. Please." Lena's knees buckled. She stumbled forward, voice caught in her throat. "Is someone there? This is Officer Harrow. You're safe now. Please answer." Nothing. Then, shuffling, soft, weak, a cough. Lena turned to Zeus, who had moved to the far corner of the cellar, his head tilted toward a pile of blankets that looked more like rags. And then a hand emerged, tiny, trembling, blue with cold. Lena dropped everything and ran. She pulled back the layers and gasped. 4 children, huddled, barely conscious, their eyes too wide for their faces, stared up at her like they were afraid even now they wouldn't be seen. The youngest, a boy, didn't speak, just reached out for Zeus, as if he'd dreamt of the dog, and the dream had finally come true. Lena sobbed as she radioed for backup. "They're alive," she whispered. "My God, they're alive." And as sirens began to scream in the distance and daylight clawed its way across the field, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Someone had hidden them there for a very long time, and someone had just tried to make sure no one ever found them. Lena stayed crouched beside the children, her hands trembling as she touched their fragile arms one by one, checking for signs of life. Each child was shockingly underweight, their cheeks sunken, lips dry and cracked. The youngest girl, barely 4, kept her eyes closed, but her chest rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. The oldest, a boy who couldn't have been more than 11, stared blankly into the dark corner as if still waiting for a monster to return. He didn't flinch when Lena spoke, didn't blink when the light hit his face. But when Zeus stepped closer, the boy reached out and touched the dog's fur with a desperation that shattered something inside her. The radio on her shoulder crackled again. "Dispatch to Unit 17. Lena, do you copy?" Lena's voice was hoarse. 4 children, all alive, hidden in a concealed cellar beneath the McAllister barn. I need medical. Immediate. Bring blankets, oxygen, trauma units, everything. There was silence for a second on the other end, then, copy that. Ambulance and child services en route. ETA 12 minutes. Zeus let out a low, anxious whine, his ears twitching. Lena followed his gaze. In the back corner of the cellar was a locked metal crate, a heavy-duty one, padlocked and bolted to the floor. Lena's heart raced. It looked like something used for transporting large animals, but it was stained, scratched. She hesitated, then approached. The stench hit her before she even got close. Inside the crate was a fifth child, not moving. Lena's knees collapsed and she landed hard, crawling forward. The child was older, maybe 12, but her body was still, her skin pale. One hand lay limp outside the bars, and on the inside of her wrist, the bruises were clear. Rope burns. Repeated. Lena fumbled with her keys. The padlock was old, rusted, and stubborn. Her fingers bled as she fought it, but finally, it snapped open. She yanked the door back and pulled the girl into her lap, checking for any hint of a pulse. For one unbearable moment, nothing. Then, faintly, just faintly, her chest moved. Lena wept. Zeus pressed close to her side, his breathing shallow, tail stiff. He hadn't barked, he hadn't growled, but his body was tense, eyes locked on the entrance above them. Someone had locked these children in here, and someone might be coming back. Lena stood quickly, carrying the unconscious girl and motioning for Zeus to stay alert. The oldest boy tried to stand too, but collapsed. His legs were too weak. Lena laid the girl gently by the stairs, then returned and carried out each child one by one. The smallest girl clung to Zeus's neck the moment he bent near, her tiny, hands curling in his fur like she'd done it before, like he was the only thing that had felt safe in all those months. Outside, the field was quiet. The barn's silence felt heavier now, as if it had swallowed screams for years. Lena laid the kids down near her cruiser, wrapped them in the emergency blankets from the trunk, and whispered that help was coming. But Zeus still wouldn't stop. Staring at the barn, Lena followed his eyes. That's when she saw the faint tire marks in the mud. Not from her cruiser, not from emergency responders. Someone had been here just minutes before, maybe even while she was below, and the tracks were fresh, leading toward the woods. Without thinking, she reached for Zeus's harness. "Track," she whispered. He bolted. They plunged into the trees, the wet branches slapping at Lena's arms as they ran. Zeus moved fast, nose low, body cutting through the underbrush like a missile. They followed the tire tracks until they disappeared into deeper brush, but Zeus didn't stop. His instincts were locked in. He knew who he was chasing. After 10 minutes, they reached a clearing where an old van was hidden beneath branches and a tarp, still warm, empty. Zeus growled, not in fear, but in warning, and then they heard it, a twig snapping behind them. Lena spun. A man stood there, mid-40s, thin, twitchy, dirt smeared across his jaw. He wasn't surprised to see her. In fact, he smiled. "You're too late," he said softly, stepping back. Lena raised her weapon. "Don't move. You're under arrest for kidnapping and unlawful detainment of minors." But the man darted. He didn't get far. Zeus launched like a bullet, taking him down with force Lena had only seen in simulations. The man screamed, his hands flailing, but Zeus held fast until Lena reached him and cuffed him. "You don't understand," the man panted. "They're not just kids. They were meant for something bigger, someone higher up. He won't let this end." Lena pushed his face into the dirt. "It ends today." Back at the barn, ambulances lined the field. The children were already being lifted into stretchers. One paramedic turned to Lena, eyes glassy. "If you had come an hour later, they wouldn't have made it." Lena looked at Zeus, now calm, blood on his muzzle from the takedown. He stood tall beside the youngest child's stretcher as it rolled into the ambulance, never breaking eye contact. And in that moment, she realized something chilling. This wasn't the end of something. It was only the beginning. The sirens faded behind Lena as she watched the ambulance disappear down the dirt road, carrying 4 terrified children who had no idea what normal felt like anymore. But in her chest, nothing felt resolved. Not with Zeus pacing beside her, ears still perked, nose twitching at every gust of wind. Something was off. Something was unfinished. The man Zeus had taken down, Paul Reddick, was now in custody, restrained in the back of a deputy's cruiser. His stare through the window had been unsettling, not in the way most criminals looked when caught, but in the way someone looked when they knew this wasn't over. His last words before being hauled off were mumbled, but Lena had caught one phrase clearly. We were just the middlemen. She stood in the field outside the barn, eyes scanning the ground. Deputies combed through the property. Forensics flagged areas where chains had been found. An old mattress soaked in filth had been dragged from under a haystack. Every corner reeked of silence, of things that had happened when no one was looking. Lena didn't speak, didn't move, until Zeus stopped suddenly near the base of a rotting tree stump just behind the barn. He stared down, pawed once, and then looked up at her. She walked to him slowly. What is it, boy? Zeus pawed again, more forcefully this time. Lena dropped to her knees and began clearing away the brittle grass and loose soil. It didn't take long. Beneath just a few inches of dirt, she found a small metal lockbox, rusted, scratched, and locked. Back at the station, she pried it open with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, dozens, grainy, faded, children in dark rooms, children chained, crying, sleeping on concrete floors. Lena flipped through them with growing horror, until she found one she recognized. A young boy, curled in a corner, his back facing the camera, a number written in black marker on his arm. The same boy who had gripped Zeus's fur with hollow eyes. Then came the documents. Shipment logs, transactions, names, codes. Most were written in shorthand, but Lena had worked trafficking cases before. She knew the language. These weren't just kids who had been taken for some twisted local operation. They had been part of something larger, an organized route, a pattern, something that moved children through states like merchandise. And the barn, it had been one of many stops. She called her captain immediately, voice shaking as she explained what they'd found. Within hours, a joint task force was mobilized. Homeland Security, FBI, CPS. Names from the list began triggering red flags in systems across 3 states. A network that had gone unnoticed for years was suddenly exposed, cracked open by the sharp nose of one German shepherd and the refusal of a local canine handler to ignore a dog's instincts. But even as the case widened, Lena couldn't shake one thing: the 5th child, the girl in the crate. Her vitals were stable now, but she still hadn't spoken a word. Doctors said she had signs of prolonged silence, not physical trauma, but psychological shutdown. Trauma so severe that the brain went quiet to survive. Lena had seen it before, but not like this, not in someone so young. She visited the hospital late that night. The little girl was awake but didn't react when Lena entered the room. She just stared at the wall. Lena sat beside her and said nothing for a while. Then she pulled out a small toy, one of Zeus's training balls, and placed it gently on the bed. The girl looked at it, then slowly, so slowly, reached for it. His name is Zeus, Lena said softly. He's the one who found you. He doesn't like bad people, and he never forgets a friend. There was a flicker in the girl's eyes, not quite understanding, but not quite vacant either. He's waiting outside, Lena added, watching her reaction. Would you like to see him? The girl blinked, just once, then, barely perceptible, nodded. That single motion shattered Lena. Moments later, Zeus padded in, tail low, movement slow. He stopped at the edge of the bed, and the girl stared at him like he was something out of a dream. Then, her small fingers reached toward his fur and clutched it, not like a stranger, but like she remembered. Later, Lena would learn from the case file that this girl had been missing for nearly a year, taken from a foster home in Idaho. Her case had gone cold 3 months ago, but somehow, she had survived long enough for Zeus to pull her back into the light. Outside the hospital, Lena sat alone on the curb, staring up at the moon. Her chest ached, not from exhaustion, but from fury, from grief, from the realization that the barn was not a freak crime scene. It was a symptom, and there were more barns, more roots, more children still waiting. She turned to Zeus, who sat calmly beside her, his eyes still scanning the dark like a sentinel. This isn't over, she whispered. Zeus let out a quiet breath, and it sounded almost like agreement. The cold wind picked up as dusk fell over the wooded stretch outside town, brushing through the tall grass like whispers from the past. Lena leaned on the cruiser, arms folded tight, staring at the property they'd now taped off completely. She'd just hung up the phone with the FBI agent assigned to the case. His voice had carried the same tension she felt in her bones. This wasn't a closed chapter. It was a doorway to something much bigger. What they found in that lockbox had torn a hole in a network no one had even known existed. Zeus lay beside her, his head on his paws, eyes still scanning. He hadn't relaxed since they left the hospital. It was as if he, too, felt the weight of unfinished business. Lena had trusted dogs for most of her career, but something about Zeus felt deeper, like he wasn't just sniffing for scent, but listening for truths buried in silence. Inside the barn, tech teams had returned with UV lights and ground-penetrating radar. What they found wasn't bodies, but it wasn't nothing. Tiny etchings on the inside of crates, like children trying to remember their names. A shoe that didn't belong to any of the 4 they recovered. A partial list of initials carved under the floorboard in a child's shaky hand. This place had been used longer than anyone had guessed. The children rescued were the most recent, maybe the lucky ones. Lena's phone buzzed again. It was the hospital. The little girl had said something. Her first word, Nina. No last name, no context. Just that single name, spoken through cracked lips, like it had taken all her strength to hold it in, and even more to let it out. Lena's pulse spiked. That wasn't one of the girls found in the barn. So who was Nina? The team scrambled to check the logs again. No record of that name, but one of the ledger entries had listed a destination, Red Pine Storage Facility, abandoned years ago, now overtaken by weeds and dust. Lena remembered passing it countless times on patrol, never thinking anything more of it. She didn't wait for backup. She called it in, but she went alone, with Zeus in the back seat and her weapon locked at her side. When they arrived, twilight had painted the old facility in haunting shades of orange and gray. The structure groaned in the wind. Most units were rusted shut, their locks disintegrated with time. But one, number 208, had clean tracks in front of it, fresh tire marks. Someone had been here. Recently. Zeus stiffened the moment he stepped out. He pulled hard on the leash, his nose low, his body alert. Lena followed, heart thudding against her ribs. At Unit 208, she tried the handle. It was locked. She took a step, back, aimed, and fired. The lock snapped open with a metallic scream, and the door rolled up. What they saw made her knees buckle. The room was small and mostly empty, but in the center, on a pile of blankets, was another child, a girl, curled up, motionless, eyes wide open and glassy. Lena rushed in, kneeling, hands trembling as she checked for signs of life. A pulse. Weak, but there. Zeus nuzzled her side gently, as if confirming what Lena already felt. This was Nina, and she had been left to die. The child looked up, barely conscious. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Lena cradled her head, whispered, "You're okay now. You're safe. You held on. We found you." Tears blurred her vision. She didn't even remember calling it in, but within minutes, the roar of sirens echoed through the trees. EMS arrived. Another child saved, but this changed everything. Nina wasn't on any list, which meant there were more kids not documented, unnamed, forgotten, shuffled like ghosts through rural drop points, treated like inventory. Back at the station that night, Lena stood before a map of the county, each location now marked. The barn, the storage unit, the road where one of the boys had said, "We stopped for hours in the back of a van." A pattern was emerging, each site like a breadcrumb on a trail no one was supposed to follow. She picked up Zeus's worn tennis ball and squeezed it. He was lying near her desk, eyes half closed but ears twitching every time a phone rang. "You did good," she whispered, not expecting a reply but feeling his loyalty in the silence. "We're not done yet, are we?" He blinked slowly, then stood. The next morning, agents expanded the search beyond county lines. Warrants were issued. A judge ordered full excavation of several properties linked to the names in the documents. And at the heart of it all, two unlikely heroes, a small-town officer who refused to trust silence, and a dog who wouldn't stop digging. As word spread, Lena was flooded with messages, missing persons reports, tips, even confessions. One thing became clear. People had known pieces of the puzzle. They'd just never been brave enough to say them out loud. But now they were, because someone finally listened, and a child finally spoke. The courtroom was silent, except for the echo of footsteps as Lena entered, Zeus walking at her side. Months had passed since the raid on the barn, and still, every time, she saw one of those children's faces, especially Nina's. Her breath caught. But today wasn't about silence. Today was about reckoning. Judge Moreno sat tall behind the bench, his jaw tight with restrained fury. On the other side of the room sat the man responsible for all of it. David Claiborne, former businessman, former philanthropist, and the architect behind a trafficking ring that had stolen childhoods, silenced cries, and profited from the darkest kind of suffering. As the court clerk called Lena to the stand, she walked forward with measured grace, her eyes never leaving Claiborne's. Zeus sat at her feet, calm but alert, the silent sentinel who had turned this case from a cold file into a living cause. The prosecution laid out every detail: how the barn was the last holding site before children were moved across state lines, how the floorboards had contained DNA from over 16 different children, how Nina, despite her trauma, had identified the man who left her in that storage unit to die, and how Zeus, following nothing but instinct and loyalty, had found her before it was too late. But it was Lena's testimony that pulled the room to stillness. She didn't just speak as an officer. She spoke as a woman who had carried the screams of children in her dreams and stood in the cold earth watching a dog dig like his life depended on it. She told them about the list of initials, the names, that still hadn't been matched to any living child, the belongings recovered that no one ever came to claim, and the single word Nina had whispered when she was strong enough to speak again: safe. The jury didn't need long. The verdict was unanimous, guilty, on every count. As Claiborne was led away in cuffs, something strange happened. Zeus growled, not loudly but low and steady, enough to send a chill through the courtroom. Lena placed a hand on his head, grounding them both. Justice didn't always feel like closure, but today it felt like hope. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Survivors, families, strangers who had followed the story and showed up to say one thing: they were listening now. A woman approached with a boy who looked no older than 6. He had a scar above his left eye and clutched a small, worn, stuffed bear. The woman knelt beside Lena and said, "He hasn't spoken in over a year, but this morning he said a word." "Zeus," he watched the story. "He recognized your dog." Lena's throat tightened. She crouched to meet the boy's gaze, and Zeus leaned forward, gently licking his hand. The boy didn't flinch. He smiled. And that small moment shattered the wall Lena hadn't even realized was still around her heart. Later that night, back at the station, Lena sat with the case file. She opened the envelope labeled "Unmatched Items." Inside were photos, tiny shoes, hair ties, drawings on napkins. She looked at them one by one, committing each to memory. They weren't just evidence. They were whispers, begging not to be forgotten. She stood and walked to the wall where they'd pinned every lead, every name, every recovered child. On a new blank space, she placed a photo of Zeus sitting beside the barn, his head turned toward, the wind. Beneath it she wrote one sentence: "He never stopped listening." The department later announced that a permanent task force would be formed to investigate historic trafficking routes, and Lena was asked to lead it. She accepted, but only on one condition: Zeus stayed with her. In the months that followed, the two became symbols, not of tragedy but of truth. More children were found, more names reclaimed, more monsters pulled from hiding. But what mattered most wasn't just the arrests or the verdicts. It was the shift in the world. People were watching differently now. They questioned more. They noticed more. And in homes where fear had once lived, there were now dogs curled beside beds, guarding dreams. Lena never claimed to be a hero. She credited Zeus, the stubborn, soulful K9 who refused to let the silence win, who taught her that sometimes the smallest clues carried the loudest truths, and that justice wasn't just found in courtrooms, but in barns, in fields, in the dark corners where children waited to be seen. On a quiet morning nearly a year after the first rescue, Lena took Zeus for a walk near the barn. It had been raised and turned into a memorial garden. Wind chimes hung from the trees, each representing a child saved. The breeze made them sing softly, a lullaby of survival. Zeus paused beside a plaque that read, "In honor of those who waited and the ones who came." He lay down, resting his head on his paws. Lena sat beside him, running a hand along his back. "You changed everything," she whispered. And for once the world was silent, not with ignorance, but with peace.